Well, everyone, it's Shane Conto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to Lost in the Wasteland, my weekly interview show where I get a chance to get to know somebody else's perspective on movies. And this time, for the fifth time on Lost in the Wasteland, I have my wife Jess here, and we're going to continue her film curriculum, which is based off of Westerns. And Westerns are so funny, aren't they, Jess?
They're so much fun. Just top comedy.
There you go. But this time, as we did Stagecoach last time, we're going to be taking on the film High Noon, and this is part of the progression through the history of Westerns. This one is a little bit different than most Westerns, as it doesn't really take on big sprawling landscapes and big adventure. We're stuck in a small town, basically in real time, and this is from 1952. And from director Fred Zinnemann, starring Gary Cooper, Grace Kelly, Thomas Mitchell, Lloyd Bridges, and a collection of other familiar faces from the era of film. But Jess, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. I'm flattered you think my opinions are different than yours.
Well, we're going to find out if they are as we talk about High Noon.
My second reaction was, that was Grace Kelly?
Yes?
She looks like, I'm not great with faces.
There was a very young Grace Kelly at this point, who was very, very young for Gary Cooper.
I've been in her grave, but I couldn't pick her out of a lineup. Well, I mean, I couldn't pick her out of a lineup, but I did find her grave in Malta.
There you go.
Monaco, sorry.
Yes.
Maltese and Monaco people.
She became a queen?
Princess.
Princess.
I think it was Princess Grace Kelly.
There you go.
And Prince Rainier. Her grave had way more flowers. Not that it's a contest, but
being Hollywood royalty wasn't good enough. She had to become real royalty.
Well, that was a controversy. Apparently, I learned about it in Monaco because besides gambling, they're very proud of their royalty. Grace Kelly
and James Bond movies.
And James Bond movies, and not being Malta. It's a different country.
There you go. Okay. But to get things started here, just why is High Noon such a classic film?
I think Wikipedia told me, and I agree, it is markedly different. I mean, even if I didn't Wikipedia it the first time I saw it, I actually hated it the first time I saw it. I can't remember if it's just unfettered ADHD or...
Well, I remember the first time we attempted to watch this when we were together the first time. We were trying to watch it on the streaming apps on the Nintendo Wii.
That's probably why.
And don't. If you have a Nintendo Wii, don't use any of the apps on it because they all suck and the buffering is horrendous. So, but the last two times we watched it on, well, I think I rented it on Amazon back in 2020 when we did watch it. And then I got a used old copy from like I think it's like Artisan Masters copy of the film. But yes, this time around and the last time around, we actually watched the hour and 25-minute film without buffering, because last time, I don't even think we finished it. It was that terrible, the buffering.
That's probably why I hated it. Or I got confused with something else.
But why is this a classic?
It was the first one that was really... I feel like it really clearly diverged from Western lore. Like, some of them hinted at... Like, Stagecoach hinted at different stuff. And mm-hmm. Just like, here's a train. And they did some new stuff, but you're right. It doesn't feature landscape. It's very small. It's one town, mm-hmm. period, with like what, maybe collectively 30 people. There weren't a lot of people there.
You know, it is the kind of film that kind of sets the stage for stuff like The Hateful Eight and other films in the Western genre that don't, because like
Drifter.
True also, which only took place in a small town. There's at least some impressive landscape shots, especially at the beginning and the end of High Plains Drifter. And Quentin Tarantino went out of his way to have like beautiful shots of the landscape because, you know, he was going for that specifically. This, you could have plopped, like, I don't even think there's any specific like real landscape shots that like this film really needed to be on location. It could have just been on a set. Mm-hmm. And
it probably was.
Could have been.
What was it? Spawn Ranch?
Could have been. It's like, it could have, like, there's no Monument Valley or anything like that. This is not a John Ford Western. It doesn't go for that kind of aesthetic at all. and it definitely does differentiate itself. And most westerns, I think, except for Slow West, are definitely not below 90 minutes. So this is also something that's only an hour and it's only 85 minutes.
I forgot to mention that.
But what are some of the standout scenes from the film for you?
Well, the first one that came to mind was the him writing his last will and testament, because it's very intense. Like, he starts and he stops. I think it shows him at a very vulnerable moment of, like, confronting his own mortality.
Absolutely.
And then you have the clock, which is just constantly ticking. Unlike the menu that we had in the DVD, which was like 16 different clocks. Pretty sure it was just the same one copied and pasted a bunch.
Yeah, it's a pretty busy looking DVD menu. It's a
Early
very
DVDs.
old DVD.
I missed that.
Because this isn't on, like, this is not on Kino, this is not on Criterion Collection. So, like...
It is in the Library of Congress, though.
There you go. As it should be. Because it is a timely and significant film that stood the test of time, and we'll get to that in a bit. Or towards the end. But specifically, I think one of the scenes that really stood out to me most, and I think shows some of the most impressive filmmaking from Zinnemann, the director, was the montage of cross-cutting between the train coming in, and, like, all of these things coming to a head, and then, bam! You hear the whistle on the train, and that just stops it dead, and it snaps him out, and then everyone's like, it's coming.
What happened to the whole hotelier who was, like, waiting for it?
Reprimanding
Grace Kelly for getting out of town. He's like, I wouldn't get out of town for anything.
That guy was getting off on it. Like...
I mean, here's the thing. It's a town of 30 people. You can only talk to everybody about their lives so much before you reach maximum level of entertainment.
Well, I think this is an interesting segue into my next...
Well, I was going to say, isn't that part of it, that it's a boring town?
Well, so the basic idea and the concept and the plot of this film is you have Gary Cooper, who's playing a marshal, who's retiring, marries a young Quaker woman, and is going to go off to St. Louis, move away, and settle down. But the issue is, he finds out right after he gets married and is about to hop on the next train, the train coming in holds Frank Miller, who is a notorious criminal who has been released and is returning back to this town where he kind of ruled the roost. And you could tell, like, certain people are happy that this town is not filled with a bunch of criminals and bandits and stuff like that, because they could actually have a nice life with a family.
There was the Jaws guy too. It was like investors.
Well, and then
their business.
Exactly, and then you have the group of people in town who benefited from Frank Miller being there and aren't happy since it got cleaned up. Because, like, the man from the hotel's like, we used to be busy when Frank was around. And then all the people in the bar, of course, were like all about Frank, because Frank was cool. He came drank with us, not this uptight marshal Gary Cooper guy. But it's interesting because this film is in black and white, plays with a lot of black and white, is very gray. There's nothing very specific. Like, there's so much complexity to all the perspectives that are presented in this film. And I think something interesting to ask would be, what do you think are some of the societal metaphors that they're trying to capture in this film and trying to represent on screen in this Western?
Definitely the old Freudian idea of the ego, the superego. There you go. Which is just another way to say good or bad.
Whoops.
You're right, there's no clear, I mean, it is very gray, there's no clear path forward for any of them. There's no easy choices there. It's not as simple as leave or stay.
Well, I guess you could say Marshall Kane is very much the most level person, and you have Lloyd Bridges' deputy marshal, who's basically just like a thriving pulse of energy and just...
A live wire?
Yeah, and, like, it's all emotion. Like, he's mad at Kane because, like, why did I not get put in charge when you left? And
Kane tells him
he's like, you treat me like a child. They think I act like a child. It's like, well,
Well, people tell him that repeatedly, too. I think it goes with the themes of masculinity, of everyone's trying to be ultra manly, except Will, who just wants to... He was one day away from retiring.
I was one day away from retirement. It is very much because the Western was used so heavily in constructing very normative perspectives on masculinity in American society. It's based on, like, the whole entire idea of a man taking control and not worrying about the law, and there's no courts or anything like that. It's lawlessness and you taking those steps and taking the lead and control. And this film does present a main character who admits he's afraid, who wants to, like, even in the climax of the film,
he's running.
It's not like John Wayne standing out there just firing pistols.
Yeah, no, he was smart about it.
He's sneaking around. He's trying to be strategic about
playing
things.
The game on stealth mode.
Exactly.
And he's tender. I mean, he's tender with his wife more than you would think. And suddenly John Wayne hated this movie.
Well, and you even have, like, he has a relationship with the former Marshal, Lon Chaney, that you could tell there was, like, a love there and, like, a fatherly mentor relationship.
Just because Gary Cooper's not young himself. But
exactly.
Lon Chaney's even older.
Yeah. And it's that kind of film, and it's kind of turning things on head. Now, I know at the time a lot of people perceived this as a perspective on, like, the Red Scare and communism and stuff like that. Just, do you see that here?
I do. I think it's speaking about how easy it is to reinstill a sense of, like, lawlessness and panic and really turn people against each other. Because you even saw that little bit of, I think it's called tribalism, where it was like you have the pro-Frank people and the not pro-Frank people. Period. And Will, I think, was trying to work between them, but didn't really work. I mean, diplomacy is not a trait you usually see in classically masculine characters. And John Wayne hated this because he thought the townspeople were cowardly, and that's un-American.
Well, it's interesting because
they're all
it's like
selfish.
It is very true. It's like they will not come together in a collective.
Because they're all out for their own interests.
And they won't come together for the good of this town because they don't hold the same kind of, like, lawful good perspective that Marshal Kane has.
Well, I think the pastor touched on that a little. The parson, I think they call him. He touched on that when he in the church when he said, Will, Gary Cooper's character, Will, asked him what he thinks of the situation. He said, on one hand, I get that Frank is evil, and on the other hand, you're telling these people to go kill each other and themselves. Like, he said, I don't have an opinion, because...
Well, and the town is very conflict-adverse. Because you have the mayor, like Thomas Mitchell, you have Lloyd Bridges' character, multiple people trying to take Frank and just get him the hell out of town. Because they don't want the conflict. They don't even want to choose a side between good and evil.
It's avoidance.
They just want to be able to, like, leave me alone. Like, they don't want the blow-off that will happen if Will stuck around. And it's the kind of thing where, though this really isn't seen in Westerns, because a lot of the time it's like town's going to take things into their own hands.
Brace yourself.
And this is, like, lawfully thrusted upon them, and they're still like, no, goodbye. And it's interesting because it shows a disrespect for the law in the film, specifically Marshal Kane, and then it shows a disrespect and lack of connection and caring about a collective ideal, which I guess if the film's tried to portray that as the collectivism and the need to be able to stand up together as something that's good, and then the film is portraying the townsfolk who won't do that as bad.
Communist.
I guess that is where you could kind of see that perspective coming into it, because they are all acting upon individualism and thinking about what's best for them in that context. Even, like, the hotel man or the bartender who were better off when Frank was there, but like a criminal was running your town. But
bartender
the thing
looked very sad in that one scene.
it's like having those kinds of things. And something else to think about is like, what do you think this film says about human nature?
It's the duality of man, isn't it? Selfish and altruistic. And I'm stuck on negative reinforcement. It's the BA side of my brain. Because negative reinforcement is one of the most effective ways of behavior change. Also unethical to do in a lot of cases, because you have to introduce something unpleasant to get you to take away from it.
Well, it's interesting
because it's like avoiding a road because you got a car accident there. You're avoiding future car accidents by taking a different way home.
Well, it's interesting because they're presenting the fact that something negative is coming into town.
And they're all avoiding it.
But they won't even do anything about it. Because it's not there.
They try to send them away to avoid conflict.
Well, I guess it's they try to avoid the conflict, but they don't try to avoid the negative force that's coming into their town.
No.
Because...
Well, was he coming... I might have missed this. Was he coming back to the town to exact revenge on the town, or specifically for Will?
Well, I don't think he wants to exact revenge on the town, but I think he wants to come back and take the town back over.
Because they did say
he has friends there. You would imagine that this town would revert back to how it was before Kane took out Frank. So, the idea of humans being so open to just reverting back no matter how much progress you make is a little concerning. Because then what's the point of progress if you can so easily fall back and regress back into how things were because you take one catalyst out? It's like, how fragile is progress when one initiating force created that progress, initiated it, and then the second you take it out of the system, boom. It's like...
You're reintroducing a...
Well, and I think...
Stimulus.
I've heard you talk about, like, this is why rehab doesn't work.
Oh, yeah. Well,
because, like...
Yeah, it's the BA side of my... I mean, if you introduce a stimulus that was present in a certain set of conditions, so when you're using or you're drinking or you're, doing whatever habit it is that's unhealthy for you, me picking my... not picking, but, pulling my eyebrow hair out. I used to do that in school. If I'm in academic situations, I will pluck my eyebrow hairs out again. Not that bad. I got big old bushy ones. So they can take it. But I mean, that's something that you see a lot, is when you go back into the environment or you see a stimulus that you had while you were a certain way or learning something, or that's why studying doesn't always work either, is because you learn studying at your desk, probably highly caffeinated and sleep deprived, and when you're at the test you don't have those things. Well, you might be sleep deprived. You're probably sleep deprived.
Most college students are.
But yeah, no,
and
I was thinking,
also probably high on caffeine.
Yeah, well that's what I mean, when we're very sensitive to our environments, and that's why one very effective intervention for habit change is to go in a different environment. But unfortunately, that means when you go back into there.
Well, interesting comparison to the film Bodies, where it's just like that, which came out this year, was very much about our influences on each other, and where Frank is that friend from when you were younger, who you used to get in trouble with, who just shows back up again and is like, well, you're going to get back to trouble. And your parent, Marshall Kane, is hightailing it out of here and just leaving you up to your own devices. Yeah. And I think that's a very human kind of idea that generally that kind of stuff doesn't get tackled in like a genre film like this, specifically Westerns. Like you would imagine stuff that in like science fiction and stuff like that, which despite the fact being very not human in so many ways, science fiction's all about humanity and being able to use those kind of metaphors. And it's very interesting to see a film like this tackle those kinds of things.
I think Westerns tend to be very linear too. There's a story, something happens, it's A, it's B, and then it's C, that's the end. There's very little cycling back to the beginning, which I think Unforgiven touches on as well. Although he did. Did he go back to it?
Well,
he did, but did he stay there?
Well, that's the thing. They pushed him to that place, and unfortunately, William Money showed up.
I think that
for the whole town. Unfortunate for them.
I think that's what challenges people too, because it's an ambiguous ending, really. I mean, this one, I guess, is not as ambiguous. He gets in his carriage and drives it away.
No, it's very...
What happens to the town?
It is very... They have no law anymore, I guess. the new marshal's supposed to show up in town the next day. So, like... Apparently.
Is he, though?
It's going to be Chris Mannix.
That's part of... I was going to say, that's part of the Hateful Eight, too, is they have a new sheriff. But even that guy has to establish himself. I mean, when do you think a town's weakest or government's weakest?
Is Mannix the new sheriff? We don't know. We'll never find out.
I feel like he's too stupid to really lie that well.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think he's not the brightest criminal.
What's interesting, kind of segueing off of one particular point you made, but what are your thoughts on in terms of how this film is structured and the efficiency of the script that turned this real-time story into an hour and 25-minute film that works so well?
I feel like it feels both slower than it is and faster than it is, because it doesn't, in my opinion, and like I have a short attention span, ADHD and all that, but it doesn't really drag for me at any points, because it's always progressing towards this, and I think it does a good job at making you anticipate what's coming without feeling like it's rushed. There's not a lot of exposition, which is nice. I'm always a fan of that. I mean, there is a little bit with the Kathy, I can't remember her name.
His wife?
No.
Helen Ramirez?
Helen, yeah. So Helen, I mean, there's a little bit there, because clearly they've got a history.
Who owns the hotel.
Yeah, good for her. She got out, she made a tidy profit, and hopefully she gets
peace.
More. Good for her, yeah.
But I think
brain stopped working.
Before you were talking about like structure, like how there's an expected structure to a Western, and there's expected structure to most films. It's a 3-act structure. I don't know if this quite has a 3-act structure necessarily.
Feels like 1 act.
It's a ratcheting up tension into a blow off 3rd act when he shows up. I guess like the first. I guess, which is interesting, the way to think about it is, the first act is so small because it's up until the point you find out Frank's coming. And the whole film is the build-up to the 3rd act of Frank arriving. And this isn't something where you're going on an adventure from place to place like most Westerns.
No shooting.
Up until the very end. And this film does not need to outstay its welcome. Most Westerns were big and sprawling, and especially at least by this time, we're expanding like 2+ hour films, and like this is just 85 minutes and goes exactly what it needs to do. It's a very specific place and time, and uses that to its advantage. And you don't see a whole lot of Westerns that play with this. Mostly it's either thrillers or it's like slice of life dramas where it's just like you have this specific time. And there's probably not very many films like of this time period. You have Hitchcock's Rope. There's probably not a whole lot of films that really experimented with like this real time aspects of it, and it's something that stands out. Now, thinking about the people that bring this film to life in terms of the acting, but who do you think were some of the real standouts in the cast?
Oh, well, definitely Gary Cooper. I mean, I thought that, it stood out to me. I recognize Lee Van Cleef, which is significant because I'm horrible.
He is the first person that you see in the film.
What was the eyes? I have to identify people by distinctive features, and he's got the distinctive eyes, yeah. And he looks a little menacing. He's all in black, and usually that's how they have him in films. I thought Grace Kelly was good, too, in terms of her.
For an actress
she wasn't annoyingly like a damsel in distress. I mean, she was indecisive, but she wasn't.
She was 23 at the time of filming this.
Yeah.
Well, no, she was 23 when this released.
Well, I liked Helen, too, because Helen had both the women in this, and I was reading about this earlier, someone called them proto-feminists, which I like. I like it, I'm taking it.
This was Grace Kelly's almost basically like her feature film debut.
She killed it, and I think Helen and whatever Grace Kelly's name was in the film were both very layered. I mean, they were complex, and they didn't really fight each other, to be honest, which is refreshing to see, because usually if there's a man involved, it's like, he's mine, back off, he's mine. But
nope, they ride the carriage together to the train.
There wasn't really... I didn't perceive any tension between them. Like, you could tell Helen wasn't jazzed about being in town still, because she's probably like, oh, I got all this stupid bullshit to deal with. But she really... I mean, she's the one who gives Grace Kelly the advice to not go. She's like, if he was my man, I would stay and fight for him, and that's what Grace Kelly does ultimately. So.
Well, and Helen, played by Katie Gerardo, she leaves because he's not her man anymore.
And she's going off to find a better life by herself, which good for her.
She leaves Lloyd Bridges in the dust.
Yeah, well,
he's
Lloyd Bridges,
dumbass.
Well, and she even says at one point that Gary Cooper is a man, and Lloyd Bridges is just
boy.
like, if you want to be treated like a man, be a man.
Yeah.
And he gets big mad about it and goes to find.
And then I'm gonna beat him up.
Which is hilarious because he's like a foot shorter than Gary Cooper, or so it feels.
That's the thing. Gary Cooper, like,
so don't fight people.
Marshall Caine has a presence about him in this film, and Lloyd Bridges plays his character very small and very erratic and very emotional. And that fits this character so well because that's exactly what he's supposed to be. And he's supposed to be representing this immaturity in terms of, like, he's seeing things very plainly. He's the Anakin Skywalker here. It's like, you didn't make me a Jedi Master. Well, it's like, you didn't make me a Jedi Master. You didn't make me Marshall. It's just like, well, stop acting like a child. That made people take you seriously.
I missed the child killing in this one. Never forget. We just glossed over that so much.
Now,
killed like 200 kids.
Just a quick couple of shout-outs here, because, like, acclaimed character actor Thomas Mitchell pops up as the mayor in the film, who was in Stagecoach, was in It's a Wonderful Life.
He's likable in this.
He's in a lot of very important films. He was in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington as well. And then you have, I think one of my favorite scenes in the film is with Lon Chaney Jr. And I think that's a great scene that he shares with Gary Cooper when he goes to Chaney's house. And, like...
He's tired.
He's tired. Like, he's too old for this shit.
Yeah.
And it really hits in that scene. And Chaney does a great job because, to be honest, I've only really knew Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. And, like, nothing against the Universal horror films, but, like, they're not known for their acting. In that sense. But, like, Chaney gives a really great performance in this one scene that he has, and he only pops up for, like, a very brief moment earlier in the film, so, like, realistically, many of these actors... He's
trying to get him to leave, too, earlier in the film. He's like, just get out of here. It's fine. We'll have somebody tomorrow. Just go.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it all comes down to... And it's very interesting because Gary Cooper was not considered a great actor. He was a movie star. And, like...
Well, it was back in the days of, like renting people out to other studios and crap, right?
Well, yeah, but it more specifically, like, him and, like Cary Grant, and, like, they weren't known for, like, their depth of acting prowess. Like, this is not, like, Laurence Olivier.
Well, to be fair, too, people were really looking for that at that point, per se. I'm sure people were, but, like...
Well, but the thing is, it's like, he's more of, like, the insert, like, handsome, big movie star that probably isn't well known for his act. Like, he's put into a situation where he has to show a lot of depth in this film, and I think he does a really good job. And Grace Kelly, for somebody acting well beyond her years, because, like, she's a 23-year-old acting against Gary Cooper in this film, who's... Let's do some math here. He was 51, so he's literally more than double her age.
Yeah.
And...
Could be his granddaughter.
And, you know, it's like, there's a lot of great performances in this film. Now, did Marshall Caine make the right choice by sticking around?
That's a great question.
And this is Jess's opinion.
Well, I think probably, yes. I think that that's the honorable choice, but that doesn't mean that I think there's any shame in self-preservation, really. Like, I can't blame one side or the other. I think that the most not moral, but like the most honorable choice was the one that he made.
Mm-hmm.
So, dodging the question a little bit, but...
So, if you're honorable, you obviously would be sticking with...
Yeah. And honor has led to many people dying, perhaps needless deaths.
Well...
Chivalry.
It's the Game of Thrones.
Yeah, look at
Ned Stark.
Yeah, look at that right there. So that's why I'm like, right choice, depends on your perspective.
Well, what would you have done?
What would I have done? Probably stayed and got my dumbass killed. I can't do what he did. But I'm stubborn. So I probably would have stayed and got shot right away and been a martyr.
So you would have done the same thing that he did, just...
Less cool, yeah.
So...
Well, you know me, I'm very, like...
Do you blame the townsfolk
determined.
for how they act?
I don't blame anybody for how they act. And I think that...
Except for Frank. Frank's a piece of crap.
Blame is weird with me, I think, because of the philosophy that I'm trained in, that I practice, that everything like that, where it doesn't view behavior as good or bad. It might view it as appropriate or inappropriate, beneficial, not beneficial, challenging, desirable, whatever the terms are, but there's no real good and bad. In behaviorism, there's only what gets reinforced and what gets punished, or neither, which usually falls in punishment, but that's a whole other thing. So I think that blame for me, I tend to hold people in neutral situations like this. You know, other things aside, politics, morality, I'm not as neutral with, but I think in this situation, I don't blame them. They're doing, like I said, negative reinforcement is really powerful. It's a huge driver of a lot of things. I mean, people use threats all the time. You use threats with kids. Wait till your father gets home. You better stop that before your mother sees. Like, we do that. Or, like, you know, you better stop being late at work or you get written up. That's all negative reinforcement. But I think it's sad that they've forgotten how it was, but at the same time, like, I don't blame the people who thought it was better when Frank was there for thinking that way, because they had more money, they had more resources, they had more business, and Frank wasn't beating them up, presumably. I'm assuming the people that Frank beat up were not just about having him back in town, but, I mean, I don't blame either side for feeling the way that they do. Do I think it was ultimately right? No, I tend to come from a collectivist perspective of, you know, it might be hard.
So would you have stood up and...
Yeah, go back to, I would have got the shit kicked out of me, yes. Probably.
Jess would have been standing there, just her and Gary Cooper, ready to go.
I'm spunky, but I'm not tough, so I got that.
Now...
I am a fairly good shot, but...
I guess my last question for you is, why is this film 70 years later still so significant?
I think films that tend to go against the grain and tend to go, I don't want to say against, but tend to diverge from the genre always age well like that, like this. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, all of Kubrick's films.
Raindrops keep falling.
Yeah, like that was different. That was like an art. I asked Shane the other day, do you think this is an art house film? And he had to think about it. And I had to think about it and then stopped thinking about it because I lost my train of thought.
Well, because, like... It's very much a film of that era. It's deconstructing basic ideas of what was expected in film. Because, like, the late 60s were a time where it's just, like, it was all experimental. It was all counter. It's the whole entire idea of it was counterculture. And people backlash against films like, look, and Guess Who's Coming for Dinner versus... the same year, Bonnie and Clyde, and In the Heat of the Night, which is another film starring Sidney Poitier, about racism that dealt with it in a lot more realistic way.
But I think those are films...
They didn't... Like, those were films that didn't get that recognition that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner got, because that won Best Picture.
Well, but we still talk about them today. I mean, including...
Well, that's the thing, because, like, I don't think... I could be wrong, but did... Okay, so High Noon won 4 Oscars. So it won Best Lead Actor. Interesting. Gary Cooper won the award, but could not be there, and John Wayne accepted the Best Actor award for him. Won Best Film Editing. Deserved. It won Original Song with the High Noon Ballad.
It's funny because as soon as I heard it, I was like, I know this song. It's not just from this.
And then winning for Best Music, Dmitri Toymkin. Mm-hmm. It was nominated for Best Picture. It was nominated for Best Director and Best Writing. I'd be interested to see... Will this take me?
To the page.
I want to actually see, like, the context of what this is up against. God. It's sure... So this is another perfect example of that time. This film did not get the recognition that it deserved winning Best Picture.
The Academy loves musicals.
No, it wasn't a musical.
Oh.
It's interesting because it's the film that, like, sparks a lot of Steven Spielberg's love for film, and as a kid was The Greatest Show on Earth. Cecil B. DeMille's, like, it's some kind of, like, crime thriller at, like, the circus and stuff like that. And, like, this was up against The Quiet Man from John Ford, Moulin Rouge, and Ivanhoe. But, like, come on. Out of all these films, High Noon's the only one that people consistently talk about at this point. Maybe The Quiet Man is probably the closest, but, like,
I've heard people mention the
people talk about The Greatest Show on Earth for really bad reasons.
Yeah.
Because this gets on that list of the worst Best Picture winners. And, like, if you think back, like, obviously, like, High Noon got some kind of recognition, but didn't win Best Picture, didn't get that true top prize because it just... it was different.
I could see it being divisive, too. Or, like, you know how... that's how Green Book, I think, got one, is that people were divided, voted for two different things, and then Green Book... It's like that episode of The Oscar with the Halloween Party. With Oscar... Not with the Oscars. With Oscar at the Halloween Party, where he wins with no costume because everybody else votes for him because they don't think he's going to win.
Well, it's... And the thing is, it's like... Greatest Show on Earth was big. And the 1950s were a time where people, like, television started becoming a thing. People went to the movies to watch something big and spectacle. That's why historical epics became such a big thing. Because you couldn't watch that on TV. Like, they didn't make that for TV. You could have, like, by all means, like, High Noon could have been on television.
And wasn't Color coming out, too?
Yes, The Greatest Show on Earth. Well, the thing is, like...
Because TV wasn't in color for a while.
Well, because Wizard of Oz came out in, like, late 30s.
Well, so, yeah,
like, there's obviously color.
But it was extremely expensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
they
like,
did that to show it all.
This was either a budgetary decision or a creative decision to have it still in black and white. But this is a film that I think is still talked about today because of how interesting and dynamic the themes and ideas were that were injected into a genre that generally didn't tackle gray. It takes on, like, basic good and evil stories.
Gives you a lot to talk about.
And, as we just did. But, those are all my questions for Jess about High Noon. If you have any questions that you want to ask about the film, please put them in the comments below. And we can talk about them. Maybe I could bring them up in my hopefully, my next Q&A for my 1,000 subscribers. I'm just over 30 away. And I'm going to have a big Q&A. So, like, hey, if you want to get these questions answered, please put them in the chat, into the comments below. But, Jess, thank you so much for coming on and talking High Noon.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And you'll find Jess here again, of course. She'll be on my Escape from L.A. episode
of classic.
Welcome to the Wasteland in a couple months. So... that'll be a fun time. And, of course, Jess will probably be back on here again with our next Western, which we'll have to find out what it's going to be.
I threw out my list of things.
The Searchers
changed.
The Searchers are probably going to be coming up pretty soon because that's mid-50s.
Yeah.
But, thank you, Jess, as always. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.